Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. On behalf of Mata Tripta Gurukar, Plymouth and Nathragas, USA, I extend a very warm welcome to you on the 8th meet of Sikh Women Book Club. We've covered a long, long journey. And the fact that we've collectively learned about the different works and creative imagination and mysticism genres which were written across different geographies and different times is indeed been a very fulfilling experience for several of us. And I look forward to continuing this legacy that we write each and every day in the coming times so we can keep growing as a Sikh sorority, as a Sikh community. With that, I'd like to invite upon our speakers of today to take the stage. I see Jasnoor Kaur is already present. May we have you, Preet, join us? Our first talk of today is going to be presented by Preet Kaur on the profound work, Weavers of Wisdom, Women Mystics of 20th Century. This is a very popular and a very revered book in the realm of, in the domain of mysticism. And one of the most personal and appealing definitions of mysticism that sticks with me is the belief that the union with or absorption into the absolute, or the spiritual realization and thereby comprehension of knowledge inaccessible to the intellect may be attained through contemplation and self-surrender. And as Preet and I were talking about before the start of this session, is that no matter what your pedestal of thinking is, whether you are logical, you have a logical bent of mind, or you have a more creative bent of mind, or you have a more emotional sort of a internal world in yourself, no matter which world you inhabit, as long as you are exercising contemplation and self-surrender, and you are trying to build your absorption into the absolute, that journey of mysticism is going to be yours. You are invariably going to set yourself on the path towards a personal mystical understanding or realization. So with that, I'd like to invite Preet to present her talk on this significant work. Preet?
Thank you, Harjot. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Before I start, I just want to ask and get excuse from all of you in my humble way I can. There are a lot of names in this book that I might mispronounce, or even their thoughts I might misinterpret. So excuse me on that. Excuse my ignorance and naiveness. Thank you. I want to take this opportunity to thank Nath Prakash and Mata Tripta Gurdwara Sahib for providing us with this platform to travel on the journey of understanding spirituality and oneness and mysticism. Special thanks to Harjot Panji for gathering all of us under this umbrella of Sikh Women Book Club. Thank you. Today, I am presenting Anne Bancroft's Weavers of Wisdom, Women Mystics of the 20th Century. This book talks about 15 mystic women and their journey of self-realization into feminine spirituality. The book club, I feel that our Sikh Women's Book Club needed this book to develop a better understanding on what feminine spirituality is and what mysticism is, or what feminine women mystics are. So here we are to explore 15 diverse mystic women of the past, portrayed to us by Anne Bancroft to sweeten our present. And before I delve into the book, let me open the window to Anne Bancroft's life. Anne Bancroft was born in Croydon, South London. She was the daughter of Margaret Bissett, a nurse in the First World War, and Arthur Hayward, chief editor at the publisher Cassell's. She grew up in the Quaker village of Jordans, Buckinghamshire. She was a rebellious child who shot her own foot so she did not have to go to the convent school. She married 3 times and had 4 children and 20 grandchildren. In her early years, she fell in love with the older man at the age of 17, and then she married his older brother at the mere age of 18. By the end of the Second World War, she fell in love again with Hans Lobstein and married him the second time. She then separated from him. Coming from the literal home, she quickly became a college teacher and specialized in comparative religion. She was greatly inspired by the Eastern religions, especially Buddhism. She was introduced to the Buddhist society by her artist friend, Dennis Lawson. With the Buddhist society as her home, she became the editor of its journal, The Middle Way. In late 1960, she met Richard Bancroft in her shop in Convent Garden, where she sold Buddhist books. Richard Bancroft at that time was the director of the British Museum Reading Book. For the 3rd time now, Bancroft fell in love again and married Richard in 1977. She lived until the age of 97 and was not afraid of death, as narrated by her daughter in her obituary in The Guardian. Her thirst for spiritual understanding and mysticism spilled titles like Religions of the East in 1974, The Luminous Vision in 1982, The Buddhist World in 1984, Origins of the Sacred Arcana in 1988, A Spiritual Journey, Zen, Direct Pointing to Reality, 1995, Women in Search of the Sacred in 1996, and so on and so forth. Additionally, Bancroft had a natural gift for understanding women's spirituality that echoed in her 2 widely translated books, Women in Search of the Sacred in 1996 and Weavers of Wisdom, Women Mystics of the 20th Century, 1989. Let us now try to touch the threads of the Weavers of Wisdom today, where Anne Bancroft creates a fabric of astounding insights and perceptions of 15 women mystics. In this book, Bancroft explores feminist spirituality to its core. She autographs the book by providing 2 reasons for her writing this book. Reason 1 is that she wrote a book on the 20th century mystics and sages that covered men mystics only and not women. Per Bancroft, Weavers of Wisdom is the continuation of her earlier published book, 20th Century Mystics and Sages, Exploration of the Truth, 1976. Her second reason was strictly personal. She states in the introduction of Weavers of Wisdom that she was searching something within her, and I quote, authentic feminine insights and ways of beings. I admired that even in the very early 20th century, there were women who were contemplating and thinking outside the patriotic and patriarchal religious box. This ignited my quest for understanding mystic beings, and thereby I continued to read the book further to know what the mystic thinks, feels, or perceives. Bancroft describes a mystic as anyone who has the knowledge that there are multiple dimensions, the knowledge that there are multiple dimensions to reality, and is also keen to explore these dimensions. The author leads the reader to mysticism with Evelyn Underhill's poetry, and then celebrates the discovery of truth by researching the lives of 15 nurturing souls of the 20th century. She allows these 15 spiritual pilgrims, as I must say in her own words, to illustrate their revelations in their own words. The reader is able to peek into each woman's journey in seeking and discovering real truth that assists the women mystics to awaken the truth and divinity within them, and in the process liberate themselves and assimilate in a higher and truer consciousness, interconnectedness, and interexistence. Whether it is Joanna Macy's meditation sessions on the relatedness, or Meinrad Craighead looking into the eyes of her dog when she was only 7 years old, women mystics are souls that are on their quest for expansion and spiritual growth. They seek deeper insights beyond time and space and enter into a higher realm of consciousness and oneness. As Aya Khima, the Theravada nun, explains, the mystical experience through either contemplation or meditation brings one to a level of awareness which does not leave this world behind but shows it in a different light. She further concludes, and I quote, "It is a dimension which includes transcending the world, not by leaving it, but by seeing it as it really is. I believe that we would never have a religion unless its founder was a mystic and knew a consciousness which is boundless." This statement actually reminds me of Baba Nanak's realization based on love, devotion, and faith in oneness. He travels across the world and tries to understand the insights and perceptions of different mystics. Furthermore, Evelyn Underhill states, mysticism is the art of union with reality. The mystic is a person who has attained that union, greater or lesser degree, or who aims at and believes in such attainment. Weavers of wisdom interlaces the experiences and perceptions of these majestic mystic women and creates a jewel fabric of diverse insights and perceptions of higher awakening and consciousness. It kindles the reader to look within oneself. As Kathleen Rain says, we have the right to enjoy and contemplate, as well as to consume the world. The living world is our wisdom. Know the living you. Knowing oneself is deeply rooted in knowing the truth and being with one. Almost all of these 15 mystic women suggest meditating and meditating alone, late at night, looking into your true self, tapping into your intuitiveness, entering into your ninth consciousness per Zen teacher Dr. Danette Shea. She further defines meditation is not for gaining something from, it is a tool for opening your heart and your mind, for helping you learn patience. From patience comes wisdom. When you begin to see yourself clearly, Dr. Shea then emphasizes taking it a step further, compassion. Because with wisdom, you can take care of yourself, but with compassion, you can eliminate yourself. The faith is unconditional and love is unconditional. When you are taking care of someone else, yourself is already taken care of. Several other mystic women included in this book are, and I list, British psychoanalyst Marian Milner, Twilight Nitz, author of Language of Stones, Native American Tradition, Tony Packer, teacher of meditative inquiry and the founder of Spring Water Center, Yoga Guru Anandamayi Ma, poet, critic, scholar, writer Kathleen Rain, Simone Weil, French philosopher, mystic, political activist, spiritual leader of the Brahma Kumari movement, Dadi Janki, Russian-British Sufi, Irina Tweedy, spiritual teacher, founder of Findhorn Foundation, Eileen Caddy, Korean doctor, Danette Shea, spiritual leader, Zen teacher, mystic. She has an institute in Hawaii. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a Swiss-American psychiatrist, pioneer in near-death studies, researcher into dying and life after death. She has a lot of stories. There's a list of her books that you can read at the end of Weavers of Wisdom. There's a list of books by all these wonderful women who have written books on their own also about their experiences. Bancroft weaves small biographies of these 15 treasured women mystics. their methods and teachings into one chord and brings forth feminine spirituality to us. I believe Anne's style does bring forth the uniqueness of the individual woman mystic, her views and her insights and her unique understanding of the ultimate truth and reality. Each woman is unique and her path towards enlightenment equally unique, but together they present a universal understanding of cosmic unification and oneness. As Anne said, of being so related to life and the world that the boundaries have melted. And so the boundaries kept melting for me as I tried to follow the life, the perceptions, and the values of these wonderful 15 mystic women. Anne did mention in Weavers of Wisdom that she did find authentic feminine insights and ways of beings and was able to touch feminine spirituality. I'm not sure if I got wiser in the process or touched and found the ways of beings, but the book certainly captivates me to look, to be aware, to relate, to be compassionate, and above all, love unconditionally. Finally, I would like to conclude with one of Anne Bancroft's statements from probably the last article published in 2015. Anne Bancroft, just looking, since she was 92 years at the time, here it goes. If I put down taking for granted, feeling that we usually have about everything, and if I had no expectations of what I was going to look at, simply opening my mind to whatever was there, then everything seemed new and fresh. Even the most humble objects, like a table or a chair, suddenly emerged as oddly significant and full of presence. When I did this, I felt free and liberated. It seemed that the taking for granted consciousness that we live in all the time is a narrow, stifling way of seeing what is there. It limits us to a world we think we know, but in fact don't know at all. Courtesy awaken.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Preet, for introducing us to this seminal work and taking out time to diligently go through the book and investing some real passionate and sustained energy to read this book. So, you know, one of the things that dawned upon me in a significant way when Preet was talking here at the stage was the fact that it's perhaps the first ever contribution by a woman thinker and a woman writer to present to the world a framework of feminine mysticism at times when perhaps the models of philosophy, thinking, and mysticism are predominantly coming from the men folks. And to have the inclination to do so and to follow this through a long lifetime and be on the journey. You mentioned that she's written books, Women in Search of Secret, and then Weavers of Wisdom. I think there's another book where she talks about sages, which is perhaps focused on men, the first book. So someone who was pursuing mysticism in a very diligent way throughout her lifetime speaks a lot about her. And the fact that she picked up nuggets about what mysticism meant, not just from a region or from a set of women, but she really diversified her lens very broadly. And we had women mystics from the Eastern world and the Western world collectively being studied, so that we have sort of a global framework of what mysticism could perhaps be in terms of a model for women of today. And, you know, women are supposed to be in our households. They are the ones who carry the heritage of families forward. They pass values to their children and around them, and they are action-oriented, and they're contributing every bit of the day for their family's upbringing. And for women to then find time for themselves to look inside and really seek out the personal truth not the truth what perhaps the family is telling them, or perhaps the society is saying, or perhaps the ways that she sees, the society following to grow oneself. That may not be the way for a woman to grow herself. That may not be the truth for her. And in having a book like this talk about the journeys of 15 women mystics who took the, I might say, gumption to do so, and do it in a very personal way and not use stereotypical paradigms of thought, to chart their journeys is an inspiration that I think every woman should take, and should take the time to read this book, and to perhaps then take that as an opportunity to define what does mysticism mean to each one of us singularly. We are forever going to be in the world as women, playing very active role in the bringing up of our families and passing our values to the next generation. So we are not going to be able to transcend the world by leaving it, but by living in it and locating our personal truths in the world. So all or more a responsibility towards ourselves to find what our truth is and be on a journey of our personal mysticism. Thank you again, Preet, for this wonderful talk. Appreciate it. Our second presenter for today is going to be Jasnoor Kaur, and she is going to be presenting her talk on Saint Joan, which is a play by George Bernard Shaw. Jasnoor?
So I read Saint Joe, and it's a play by George Bernard Shaw. So the author of this book, George Bernard Shaw, or simply Bernard Shaw as he preferred to be called, was an Irish critic, polemicist, political activist, and playwright. He was born on July 26, 1856 in Dublin, Ireland, to George Carr Shaw and Lucinda Elizabeth Shaw. As a child, he recalled feeling no affection from his mother, which is why he took solace in music. His mother's friend, George John Lee, who was well known in Dublin's musical community, received many books from his students, which Shaw took a liking to as well. Thus, throughout his childhood, Shaw became knowledgeable in the spectrums of music and literature. As Shaw grew up, his interest for subjects like politics and economics grew. As an adult, he read Henry George's book, Progress and Poverty, and he began attending the meetings of the Social Democratic Foundation. However, he soon became disenchanted with the SDF's leadership. H.M. Hindman chose to become a member of the Fabian Society instead. He ended up publishing the Society's first manifesto, published as the Fabian Tract No. 2, and joined the Society's executive committee in January of 1885. When he began attending the meetings of the British Economic Association, his political ideology shifted again, this time away from Marxism and towards gradualism. During the mid-1880s, Shaw's life took a turn when he published 2 novels and began his career as a critic. His books, Cashel Byron's Profession and An Unsocial Socialist, served as his last attempts in this genre. Though neither were commercially successful, Shaw was not deterred, and he began writing book and music criticisms for London's papers. His popularity as a musical critic improved, and he went on to become a theater critic as well for the Saturday Review. He was vocal about the hypocrisies and inauthenticity of the Victorian theater, calling for characters based on real ideas and true life. Shaw also continued writing plays, with some of his first plays, like The Philanderer and Mrs. Warren's Profession, making slow progress. His first play to bring him financial success was Arms and the Man, which satirized the norms of class love and military honor. Though the press criticized him for mocking heroism and patriotism, the public loved this play, and the profits from the play were enough to give up his salaried position as a music critic. Following this, his plays, including Candida and The Man of Destiny, did not aspire the same attention that Arms and The Man had, though his work, The Devil's Disciple, was able to give him more of the attention that The Arms and The Man had. Later in his life, Shaw would become more immersed in his career as a playwright and would marry Charlotte Payne Townsend, a rich Anglo-Irish woman who had nursed Shaw when his health broke down. Near the end of his life, he continued to write and had enjoyed tending to his garden in his free time. He died at the age of 94 because of injuries he'd sustained while falling from a tree. He was cremated at the Golders Green Crematorium on November 6, 1950, and his ashes, which had been mixed with Charlotte's, were scattered along the footpaths and around the statue of Saint Joanne in his garden. To provide background information, Joanne was a patron saint and military leader of medieval France. She was honored for her role in the Siege of Orleans and her insistence on the coronation of King Charles VII of France during the 100 Years' War. She inspired many French Catholics and soldiers throughout her story of being commanded by God to fight for the victory of France against England. The play Saint Joanne consists of 6 scenes and an epilogue. Shaw begins the play by writing a lengthy preface commenting on matters in the play or matters relevant to the play. He presents his view on the personage of Joanne in an objective point of view. The preface is divided into 41 subsections, which can be loosely categorized as sections 1 through 16, commenting on the various views of the historical Joanne. Sections 17 to 21 discuss the misinterpretations of Joanne in literature and in relation to medieval society and the medieval church. Sections 22 to 34 detail on the nature of Joanne's death in relation to modern acts of inhumanity, and sections 35 to 41 discuss the nature of historical drama and Saint Joanne viewed as a tragedy. Shaw sees Joanne as one of the first Protestant martyrs and describes her as a symbol of equality for women. Ironically, despite this, Joanne was martyred for 2 reasons. One of these reasons was because she listened to the dictates of her own consciousness and her own reasoning rather than the authority of the church, and the other being that she pioneered unwomanly dressing and was burnt at the stake because of this unnatural act. Many authors attempted to write about Joanne by ascribing her qualities and interpreting her actions, and these interpretations weren't always historically true. They all fell victim to their own prejudices, and they were unable to understand the environment. Shaw said, to see in her proper perspective, you must understand Christendom and the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire and the feudal system as they existed and were all understood in the Middle Ages. During that time, there weren't any neutral courts of justice, therefore it was impossible for anyone to go through an impartial trial. Joanne was tried as a heretic against God and God's church, and the church was unable to handle Joanne, questioning their authority. As mentioned in sections 22 to 34, these sections discuss the nature of Joanne's death in relation to modern acts of inhumanity. Though the medieval church did not tolerate Joanne's individualism, the modern world would be no more willing to tolerate a person denouncing the authority and power, and is therefore no closer to accepting a genius, or a saint in this case, than Joanne's world was. One advantage Shaw had over earlier writers was that he was able to have a more complete view of the Middle Ages, as he wrote the play almost 5 centuries after her death. He was also able to maintain that the play was a tragedy and not a melodrama. There weren't any villains, and these people were only characters acting as they did in their historical period. The epilogue was necessary to present a balance in the play. For example, if Joanne's execution was shown, then the epilogue would be needed to balance the tragedy of her execution and the comedy in the attempts of posterity to make any amends. In the opening scene, which takes place in a castle in the spring of 1429 AD, Joanne's character is revealed as she orders Captain Robert de Baudecroix, the owner of the castle, that he is required to give her a horse, armor, and some soldiers, and that she must be sent to Dauphin. She is shown to be a strong-willed person, in contrast to Sir Robert, who has many doubts and no strong convictions. She speaks of her mission to have been God-sent, and Sir Robert assumes that she is mad, and thus the matter of Joanne hearing voices are connected with her sanity, ultimately serving as an instrument to the point of her death. Joanne speaks that the voices of St. Catherine and Margaret have spoken to her and told her that she will not need many soldiers because the Dauphin, named Charles, will provide her with enough soldiers to raise the siege of Orleans. She informs him of the price of the armor and horses she needs and lets Sir Robert know that some of his noblemen, such as Bertrand du Poligny or Polly, are anxious to go with her. Joanne is dismissed, and Sir Robert calls for Polly, who informs him that the English have over half of France, and a miracle would be needed to regain control over Orleans. Joanne is once again summoned, and she reiterates the point that she is following the instructions of the voices. She asserts that Sir Robert will live to see the day when there will be not a single English soldier on the soil of France, and when there will be one king, and that king would be God's French one. This convinces Sir Robert that the Dauphin may take courage from John's dedication and determination, and he orders her to go to Chinon under Polly's escort, providing her with armor. At the end of the scene, he admits that there is something special about her. The second scene presents the Dauphin's castle at Chinon. One of the Dauphin's acquaintances named Bluebeard informs him that Joanne has a tremendous amount of impact on common soldiers, which is later confirmed by Captain Lahire, who believes that Joanne was an angel dressed as a soldier, as she beat impossible odds to even be present at Chinon in the first place. The court agrees over whether Joanne should be allowed to see the Dauphin, as she isn't seen as a respectable person for wearing manly attire and soldier's armor. Thus, Bluebeard offers a challenge in which he will pretend to be the Dauphin and welcome Joanne to determine if she can distinguish royalty from common folks, and if she is able to do so, she will be seen as heaven sent. When Bluebeard welcomes Joanne when she is finally allowed to enter into the throne room, she dismisses him and enters the crowd to discover the Dauphin. Dragging him out, she speaks to him of how she has been sent to free France and to crown him king in the Cathedral of Reims. The Archbishop is consulted and is convinced that Joanne is indeed pious, and therefore asks everyone to leave the room for the Dauphin and Joanne to speak alone. Once alone, the Dauphin confesses his fright and downhearted condition. While others enjoy fighting, Charles wishes to be left alone and live peacefully. Gradually, Joanne begins to fill the Dauphin with courage and patriotism by forcefully telling him that she will crown him king. She mentions that France will become holy after defeating the English, and he would rule this land. Inspired by her faith and enthusiasm, he recalls the rest of his court and announces that Joanne will now command the army and do with it what she pleases. Prior to this, the Dauphin resented the idea that he was born into being a king and detested war. Joanne's miraculous power is shown in the scene, as she is able to instill patriotism and courage into someone as frightened as Charles. The scene also introduces how Joanne is the epitome of Protestants who prefer to believe in their own consciousness instead of that of the church. Scene 3 is set 3 weeks after Joanne is appointed the commander of the French army. Dunois, one of the military leaders, paces the banks of the Loire River, waiting for the west wind to blow in his direction. Joanne arrives in full armor, wondering why they are on the wrong side of the river when the English and Orleans are on the other side. She expresses that she wants to cross the bridge immediately and attack the English forces. However, Dunois tells her that older and wiser military experts say that this tactic cannot be done. He mentions that the soldiers will not follow her to their death, and driven by her need of immediate action, she replies that she will not look back to see whether they follow her or not. She tells him that she will charge the fort and be first up the ladder, daring him to follow, which Dunois says they must sail up the river and attack from behind first, and that they must first wait for God to change the wind. They make their way to church to pray for the wind to change. However, on their way there, they notice that the wind has already changed. Dunamis believes that God has spoken with the change in wind directions and tells Joanne that he will pledge his allegiance to her if she leads the troops. Joanne's miraculous power is presented in this scene as she becomes a force like the wind, like the west wind, simply being blown to victory. Scene 4 is set in an English camp at Orleans after the French victory there and includes a discussion between a chamberlain named Master John de Staugenberg and a nobleman named Richard de Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick. Warwick advises patience while the chamberlain agitatedly claims that the recent triumphs of the French against the English have been done due to witchcraft and sorcery. He mentions wanting to find Joanne and burn her for this. The Right Reverend, the Bishop of Bovis, Monseigneur Cochon, enters the tent and informs Warwick and the chamberlain that Joanne intends to crown Charles VII king of the cathedral at Reims. Warwick tells the bishop that they believe Joanne is a sorceress and plan to denounce her at the Inquisition in order to burn her. The three argue over whether they believe Joanne is a witch or a heretic. The bishop claims that Joanne is being used by the devil and seeks for her salvation instead of burning her. They mention that her actions are performed without the consultation of the church, and she acts as if she were the church itself. They deem her a heretic because she listens to her own personal voices and visions instead of listening to the collected wisdom of the church, and the bishop vows to destroy all heretics. Warwick points out to Cochon that Joanne has a plan to supersede the aristocracy and make the king the sole and absolute autocrat. Warwick fears for himself and all other aristocrats that the king will be more powerful than them. He believed that she wanted to create a system in which the king would be responsible to God, dismissing the rest of nobility. Nobles would have to surrender their land to the king, who would then present them to God. Warwick foresaw a power struggle between the aristocracy and the church over who would carry out the policies for the king. They came to the conclusion that Joanne must die for the people. Scene 5 is set in the door of the cathedral at Reims, where Dauphin has been coronated king. The crowd outside of the cathedral are excited to see Joanne more than their king. However, Joanne wants to pray and listen to the saints speak to her when Dunois tries to convince her to see them. She asks why the courtiers, knights, and churchmen hate her, and Dunois explains that they are jealous of her power and achievements. Charles enters the room complaining about the heaviness of his robes and sparks a conversation with Joanne. She tells him that she wants to go back to her farm after taking Paris back from the English, but Charles tells her that he doesn't want any more fighting and would rather make a treaty. He also wants to know why the voices go to Joanne instead of directly to him, because he is king, to which Joanne responds, "If you prayed from your heart, you would hear the voices as well." Joanne explains that they must attack Paris while the iron is still hot. Dunois fears that Joanne's faith in God will not always work, and he foreshadows that someday Joanne may be taken by the enemy. The archbishop resents that Joanne sets the church aside because her communication with God is direct, and accuses the voices of lying to her, which Joanne denies and says that they have always been true. He thinks that she has no regard for the church because she directly communicates with the saints, calling her headstrong and proud for this. He claims that the church will reject her and she will be alone to defend herself when the church burns her for being a witch. Unaffected by these claims, Joanne goes on to say that with God's strength, she will dare and dare until she dies. The final scene takes place in a stone hall in a castle in Rouen on May 30th, 1431. Joanne had been captured 9 months prior to this when she was fighting at Compiègne. The court was assembled with Cochon, the bishop, and the inquisitor as the judges. The inquisitor mentions to the court that Joanne's case had been the gravest case of heresy he had ever experienced, and Warwick adds that even if the church let her go, her death would be a political necessity. Joanne is brought into the court chained at the ankles and vows to tell the truth as it pertains to the trial. She claims that she obeys the will of God and acts with God rather than how the church instructs her. She understands and agrees that she will suffer the consequences for her actions and will be burnt at stake. On the day of her execution, Joanne asks for a cross, and Ladvenu, an English soldier, tries to give her one. She warns him that he may be burned if he is too close to the fire, which leads him to believe that she could not have been influenced by the devil, as she was concerned about someone else's safety while being burned herself. Her remains are left in the river, though her heart doesn't burn. Though Joanne was previously given the choice to have been imprisoned for life, she chose to be burnt at stake. By choosing death, she set the path for her canonization and sainthood. The epilogue is set 25 years later in King Charles's bedchamber as he is dreaming. At this point, Joanne has been declared innocent of all charges for which she was burned as a heretic, and her judges have been condemned. As Charles converses with Joanne in her saint form, he reports to her that she forced him to become a man. Joanne accepts this new information without emotion. She accepts this information without emotion as Dunois enters the room telling Joanne that the French forces won by fighting with Joanne's strategy and that he is sorry that he didn't come to her defense and prevent the priests from burning her. Ladvenu, who fought the French for 15 years, appears in the dream. His afterlife was in hell, however he claimed that it was better than his service in the war. Next, the English Champlain appears in her dream and he tells the group how he didn't know what a cruel thing he had done by condemning Joanne to death. He became a different man after he experienced watching Joanne burn. The executioner then appeared explaining that Joanne's heart wasn't able to be burned, so she wasn't dead and was alive and everywhere instead. Warwick enters this dream telling Joanne that her death wasn't personal and that it was purely political and he had nothing against her. A gentleman from the year 1920 enters this dream telling the crowd that Joanne of Arc is now canonized as a saint. Every 30th day of May, or the day of her death, the Catholic Church celebrates Saint Joanne. The Archbishop and the Inquisitor are the last to enter the room. She offers to return to earth, however, the very thought causes immense consternation, and with apologies and excuses, they all state that they prefer that she remain dead. Joanne is then left alone as she spoke of the loneliness of France and the loneliness of God in Scene 5. The final implication is that the world will never be ready to accept its saints. Even today, and mortal eyes cannot distinguish between the saint and the heretic. Joanne wonders when and if human beings will ever be able to accept saints wholeheartedly and protect them from harm. Throughout the book, something that I noticed was that Joanne stayed determined and courageous despite her circumstances. For example, when the English had laid siege on Orleans, she went to Dauphin of France and asked him to lend her forces to help lift the siege. Though Dauphin had not originally listened, she did not give up on him, and eventually he agreed to give her what she wanted. She had also remained brave throughout the trial for her heresy, and even when she had been put in prison. She refused to let her oppressors treat her so horribly when they forced her to live off only bread and water in jail, which shows that even as she is being intimidated, she refused to be disrespected. This book has contributed to my mental growth by showing me how important it is to stay true to your goals in the face of any obstacle. She was ready to die because people doubted her devotion to God and the guidance she got from the angels' voices in her head. I'm glad that I read this book because her story has taught and instilled in me valuable lessons that will help me carry myself in the world. Thank you for listening to my book talk, and I hope that I encouraged all of you to pick up this book and to be inspired by Joanne's example.
That was quite a description and quite a experience you took us through, Jasnoon Kaur. Thanks for the talk there. And, you know, it's a bit of a book that, I mean, it did raise my goosebumps a bit, you know. And I'm confused, I guess, you know. it seems like the models really haven't changed from the previous, times to the current times. What do we call heresy and what do we call sainthood? Is the heresy of a time the sainthood of another time, and the sainthood of one time the heresy of another time, perhaps? Or is it that a ruler's manliness is really inferior to a witch's womanliness? Is woman's perceived witchcraft superior than the church's churchhood? There are just so many questions. There's just so many paradoxes that, I think, as Jasnoor was speaking, were kind of pounding in my head. And, a woman who lived for 19 years in the physical life, right, who was tried for witchcraft, burned, and then was later canonized in 1920 by Pope Benedict XV. And for someone who continued to believe that she had been sent on this earth to help christening of the King Charles to the French throne, and having that consistent voice, outward voice, from the day one to the day end, it does inspire me to learn more about sainthood when it comes from the women. And I invite you to be a part of that journey too. We've had that talk on women framework of mysticism. Now we're talking about women's framework of sainthood. Perhaps we should find out who are the other women who have been recognized as saints of their times, and perhaps reconvene and talk about this topic some more time. But thank you for pricking us, Jasnoor, for going on this journey. Thank you. The last audio presentation that we have for today is on Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali. Gagan Mahal, who's one of the members of the Sikh Women Book Club, she resides in California, so she was not able to be here, but she's been kind enough to send us a recording, which we will play right now, and hear what she has to tell about Gitanjali.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. Let's start. Of songs composed from Geet. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Let's talk about Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali. The word Gitanjali is composed from Geet, that is song, and Anjali, that is offering, and thus means an offering of songs. Arguably one of the finest poets of all times, Rabindranath Tagore was an authorial voice in the pre-independence era of India. Born in 1861 and having found his calling at the tender age of 8, Tagore chiseled his artistic bent to perfection by diligently harboring an observant and free stream of thought in his heart. In his lifespan of 80 years, he wrote many poems, dramas, and novels, which bore his distinct trademark, fresh nonconformist, optimistic, magical. He was also a prolific composer of more than 2,000 pieces of music, which came to be known as Rabindra Sangeet, and has since been rendered as a dedicated stream of Indian classical music. Gitanjali is his most famous work. Rabindranath Tagore received the Nobel Prize in 1913 for Gitanjali. Many of the verses in Gitanjali are beautiful prayers written after a painful period in Rabindranath Tagore's life, during which he lost his father, wife, daughter, and a son in quick succession. Gitanjali's literal meaning is song offerings. The major theme in Gitanjali is devotion to God. Tagore tells God is with the poorest and the lowliest and the lost people. The first stanza starts mentioning the grace of God to a human being. Tagore considers the human body as a frail vessel. God intermittently repairs its damaged and fills it up with fresh life. God is all master of human being. He takes care of his subjects and solves all their problems. In that way, man is made endless with the pleasure from God. The original Bengali Gitanjali had 157 poems. But when translated version in English was published in 1912 by the India Society of London, it took only 50 poems from the original text. The remaining 53 poems were taken from his other works. Written as an ode to the Supreme Master, these 103 poems highlight the many realizations Tagore had under the crimson sky, casting his forlorn eye and pensive heart. Tagore was one of those people who were very great because of their talents and unique ideologies. He was ahead of his time, and that is why he was able to leave quite a legacy behind. He once said, "The one who plants trees, knowing that he will never sit in their shade, has at least started to understand the meaning of life." Tagore loved God, loved him in love's literal and truest sense. He was a spiritual man, and his poems depict that love. Only love and nothing else, in its purest and pious form. He sees God in nature, in his friends, in his lover, in children, and in God himself. Each poem is filled with tenderness of an infant smile, longing of a lovelorn young woman, sincerity of a worshipper, pride of a father, and love of a mother. The poems are not in any particular order. They show his freedom of emotions. In one poem, he is a beggar, asking alms from a king. In one poem, he is a king himself. He takes roles of a child, a lover, a farmer, a poet, a prisoner, a musician, to explain his love in various forms, but equally great. I wish I could quote every single line from every single poem and show you how lyrical and scintillating his writing is, how his words dance and pour out love. They are simple, but yet so profound. Their sincerity and awe-inspiring style is what makes them so beautiful. I'm sharing a few of my favorite poems of the collection, which may or may not be his most popular ones. Passionately championing the dream that all his countrymen shared at that point in time, he etches out in this beautiful poem the country he wants to breathe in, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arm towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Many of the poems in Gitanjali are love poems. When talking about the love between two people, Tagore always expands it so that the love takes on a greater meaning, having to do with the nature of the universe. He does this not to diminish the everyday love that can exist between two people, but to show how this kind of love is more deeply woven into the very nature of world and reality. Yes, I know, this is nothing but thy love. O beloved of my heart, this golden light that dances upon the leaves, these idle clouds sailing across the sky, this passing breeze leaving its coolness upon my forehead, this morning light has flooded my eyes. This is thy message to my heart. Thy face is bent from above, thy eyes look down on my eyes, and my heart has touched thy feet. The child mother theme in Gitanjali is unique, just like Tagore's mysticism. The sleep that flits on baby's eyes, does anybody know where it comes? Yes, there's a rumor that it has its dwelling. Where? In the fairy village among shadows of the forest, dimly lit with glowworms, there hang two timid buds of enchantment. From there, it comes to kiss the baby's eyes. The smile that flickers on baby's lips when he sleeps, does anybody know where it was born? Yes, there is a rumor that a young pale beam of crescent moon touched the edge of a vanishing autumn cloud, and there the smile was first born, in the dream of a dew-washed morning, the smile that flickers on baby's lips when he sleeps. The sweet soft freshness that blooms on baby's limbs, does anybody know where it was hidden so long? Yes! When the mother was a young girl, it lay pervading her heart in tender and silent mystery of love, the sweet soft freshness that has bloomed on baby's limbs. This is one of the best descriptions of the child-mother relation I've ever come across in my life, and we can see how he just simply took it to a whole new pedestal from the above lines. According to Tagore, the butterfly counts not months, but moments, and has enough time. If we have to make similar moments in our life meaningful, we have to definitely savor each and every line in Gitanjali not once, not twice, but umpteen number of times. At the swoop of death, his philosophical eye merges the two worlds into one, equating their warmth to that of a mother. I was not aware of the moment when I first crossed the threshold of this life. What was the power that made me open out into this vast mystery, like a bud in the forest at midnight? When in the morning I looked upon the light, I felt in a moment that I was no stranger in this world, that the inscrutable without name and form had taken me in its arms in the form of my own mother. Even so, in death the same unknown will appear as ever known to me, and because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well. The child cries out when from the right breast the mother takes it away, in the very next moment to find in the left one its consolation. For Tagore, death was a reliever. He always looked at death as his friend who would finally take him and make him stand face to face with God. O thou, the last fulfillment of life, death, my death, come and whisper to me. Day after day I have kept watch for thee. For thee have I borne the joys and pangs of life. All that I am, that I have, that I hope and all my love, have ever flowed towards thee in depth of secrecy. One final glance from thine eyes, and my life will be ever thine own. The flowers have been woven, and the garland is ready for the bridegroom. After the wedding the bride shall leave her home, and meet her Lord alone in the solitude of night. You should read them, and experience that joy of reading, a mystic yourself. That is all I can say. You will not be disappointed. Tagore's scintillating and diverse oeuvre remains unmatched by many a poet who succeeded him. He inspired millions to undertake the baton of chasing dreams, irrespective of their colors of existence, and he continues to be a silent source of encouragement to people who attempt to see something beautiful in everything. Yes, everything. Thank you.
Well, a distant thankfulness to Devin for recording her talk on this book, Gitanjali.
It was surprising to me to find out that Gitanjali, which was originally composed in Bengali, was actually self-published by Rabindranath Tagore in 1910. And then later, after a couple of years, it was translated into English, and then it won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Well, one thing I will say is that Gitanjali is perhaps an epitome of a testimonial to the dictum that one's layers of consciousness, they get perhaps auto-excavated and auto-mined for when a man has lost his world. And by world, I mean the world of his most precious and dear relationships. And when that world is lost, that process of auto-excavation and auto-mining of the inner world starts in ways that perhaps does not happen when we have the gift of our precious ones around us. What a paradox. The king in him, a human being is really a universe in oneself. But that universe really awakens. The king in the human being awakens. The child in him awakens. The robber, the poet, the farmer, the mother, the son, the child. All of this magnanimity of selves awaken in that singular human person, and they awaken in him fearless ways of exploring and engaging with the outside world, which then unveils a beauty about the world, about the nature, which nature was not kind enough to reveal to him before. So it's very powerful, and it's very intriguing to me that Gitanjali was actually a work that came out when Tagore had actually lost everything, so as to speak. And it continues to be the most revered works of all times in the Eastern and the Western civilization. I believe it's a must-read for all of us. Well, with that, we are now at the end of today's session. Thank you for being with us. It's been a journey. It's been a very rewarding journey as a set of people, and I look forward to having you all in the 9th meet of the Sikh Women Book Club, which we shall have in a couple weeks from now. We won't be meeting 3 weeks from now because of the Thanksgiving holiday. The next one is actually, I think, slated 2 weeks out from now, but I'll double check and send the message as I always do. Once again, many thanks to Preet and Jasnoor and to Gagan for presenting their talks today. On behalf of Mata Tripta Gurukar and Nath Pragas USA, thanks for being with us. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.